G'day pals, welcome back to a new video. Today I thought we would talk about 2D side-scrolling tile sets in pixel art, of course. I've made a video covering this topic in the most basic way, and we do bricks in that video. I wanted to spend today's episode spending more time talking about naturalistic tile sets, so grass, dirt, rocks, that kind of thing, and with a key focus on building a tile set that fits into a scene. So this is going to be not something that you just make generically and then just like throw into 5 different games. This is like how to think about building a game's kind of like visual identity through the tile set. Okay, let's get into it. So here I have a few different examples of tile sets from games that I like or that establish their own kind of unique identity in building out that game's visual look. One of my favorite examples of a tile set in a game, this is from Chasm, and although it does have like man-made elements here, I really like the way that the grass and vines merge here between the background element and the foreground. And I really like the way that this is very seamless. You really can't see kind of like an obvious place where the tiles repeat. And they feel quite natural, right? They feel really organic. And across the board here, there are lots of examples where, you know, we can see really nice verdant grasses, especially with these indie games in the more modern era. Here we have Heartforth Alicia, Foreground and Friends, Owlboy, a favorite example of mine. This one here is from Blasphemous. And we have some other games as well, more retro. I don't want to ignore the past. We have, this is, I believe, Super Ghouls and Ghosts. I can never know what they call that. They changed it with every generation. We have Super Mario Bros. 2, Sonic the Hedgehog, and everyone's favorite, Metal Slug. So not all of these are tile sets. I mean, the Metal Slug example, I think, is more of a repeating texture. And I want to focus today on this kind of tile set, really something that you have like a template for that you can use to create levels out of that have, you know, arbitrary geometry. This one here is by Heya, who is one of my favorite pixel artists. It's actually from a video that you can catch here on YouTube. I will link it in the description. And I really love the process. It's actually from a series of videos, so you can watch the entire process of them creating this. Of course, this was made in ProMotion, and I use Aseprite. And very recently, Aseprite has been kind of upgraded with new updates with the same feature set as what was used here in this, which is like a tile set editing feature, where effectively you can take duplicates, so like this here, and this here, and this here. These are like different contexts where we're seeing the exact same tiles. And if you edit them in one place, they edit everywhere. So we're going to be using that today in Aseprite. But if you don't have Aseprite, don't worry, this will still apply to you. I want to talk very quickly about your needs as a developer. So every game is different. And while I work with kind of like this high bit style, and my tile sets tend to be really large, yours don't have to be, especially if you're learning here on this channel. I recognize that a lot of you are just starting out, and so you're probably looking for tile sets that are more simplistic and still diverse, that give you a lot of power, because you don't really know exactly what you're making, or you're not really that confident yet. But I want to talk about the full gamut, so I'll show you one of my tile sets, and then we'll talk about how that sort of collapses down into simpler examples. So this is my current template, and you can see another example here. It's the same template, just 2 different versions. You can see here my base tile sets are actually quite large. Like the simplest shape you can make here is something that's probably like 4 by 4 tiles. And so a lot of you will probably be making games where maybe 1 tile is like the base standard. So if you have a platform, you know, like in my tile set, in this tile set, I can't have a platform that's only 1 tile big, because by default, by definition, I need to have 1, you know, tile dedicated to the background grass, 1 tile dedicated to the surface that you stand on, 1 tile dedicated to fading that into black. And then from there, I need 3 more tiles to sort of like bring you back into, you know, the underside. So if I had like a freestanding platform, this is kind of the smallest example. And my levels are, you know, large, kind of undulating structures, and this is not a problem for me. I prefer it this way. But you can see here, like to get this amount of detail, I need like, you know, 3 layers of tiles just for 1 edge. This is going to be kind of like the defining element of your tile set and how many tiles you need. So many of you are probably looking for me to say, okay, here's a PNG that shows you the tiles and you want to paint them in. And I have done you know, very simplistic tile sets before. This is kind of like the most simple that I've worked on, where, you know, instead of, you know, 5 by 5 or whatever, it's 3 by 3. And I've even got a single freestanding tile on its own. And this is like the entire tile set. You can get away with some decent detail in this space, but I think the smaller you go, the less relevant this video is going to be in terms of what I really want to talk about. And what I want to talk about is texture. I want to talk about how to build those textures out and build scenes out of those textures. So the first thing I want to do is just show you like a base approach to building out your own template. Okay, I want to teach a man to fish today, as they say. So let's start with maybe like a 3 by 3 or a 4 by 4 space here. And I'm gonna double click here and drag to do the outlines. And I'm gonna say, okay, like this is the darkest color. And then this lighter color here is kind of like, it like faces the surface, and this is like kind of underneath. And then maybe I'll just do like a red line around. And this tells me that we've got edges, right? This lighter red is gonna say, okay, there's an edge here. And that's, you know, this is like a corner, basically. And we could probably do the same thing, you know, even with this internal side as well. So we can say, okay, you know, this is, so like this is different from this because of this edge versus that edge, right? They're fundamentally different. And a template by default, everything should be unique in the template. If you have a duplicate, you can delete one of them because it's redundancy. Now everything here is different. And if I use Aseprite's tile feature, so if we say like convert to tile map here, this will create a little palette, and by definition, if each of these is unique, they will create their own palette reference here, right? Their own index. And that's what this mode here does, this auto. This will reuse existing tiles, and it will delete tiles if possible. So for example, if I copy this and paste it over here, that doesn't create a new reference here, because it's the same content. But once I start changing the internals, if I start like mucking around with it, you can see now we've got a new tile because it is different from this one. So if you do want to use Aseprite's tile feature, it's available in Aseprite 1.3 beta and up. So I'm using beta 11. With a Steam version, if you go into the properties for Aseprite, you can like select to opt into the beta, and it will just update regularly. I'm not sure when Aseprite 1.3 official will be out. It's been a long time, but that's up to the developers. So this is like your base template, and this gives you a lot. It gives you like the ability to, at the very least, you know, create a shape that that covers like from full brightness into full darkness. That's what we're going to use this for. Now, those are the external corners. You may want to also have like internal corners. So you may want to have a shape that's kind of essentially the same thing but inverted. So like this goes there and this goes there. So this is now like darkness, and it actually like along the edges on the outline is going to be like fully dark and then fully dark there. And then on the very, very internals, like this is like sunlight, like right in the very corner. So if you're looking to figure out how many tiles you need to create any arbitrary shape, you need to be able to determine what your actual like criteria is. So in this case, like I've got like 1-2 tiles deep. The question is like, where does the detail go into what you would assume is like nothing? Like where can we expect for the absolute black to be in the tile set, and where is an edge? Like in this case, you know, if this was going to be grass, I need to determine like where the collider is going to be for the player. Like where exactly is the player going to stand in this tile set? Are they standing like right on top? Because if they are standing right on top here, if the collider is exactly where the tile ends, then I don't have any opportunity to do like grass behind the character or in front of the character. It's kind of like we're a bit SOL there. So the collider has to be somewhere inside of the first tile, or you'll need to do an additional tile outside that's aesthetic beyond the collider. Now personally, I've done it a few different ways before. I've done it this way. In fact, I think that's how I do it in Insignia right now. And I've done it other ways. One way you could do it is by having the colliders be somewhere like in the middle of a tile. So you could have the collider be something like this, you could do like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, say, pixels in out of 16. And then, you know, you're giving yourself a little bit of room for the aesthetic. So the reason why we need to do this is like at some point, this is going to fade into black. So what we see in a lot of these examples is, like I said, we see like a level of like grass behind where the player is standing. And then we have like the collider where the player is actually standing. And then we have more grass going into a neutral point. The neutral point, or like the black point, is kind of like where this just becomes empty space, right? And you can repeat these tiles forever, and there's no difference between like whether or not they're being lit or not. And you can see that line's right about here in this tile set, right? Like right here, this depth is detailed, this is an edge tile, and this is an internal tile. And you can repeat these forever, but you couldn't have like one of these sitting in here somewhere. And so this distance from like the edge of the edge tile to the end of whatever that edge tile looks like, that's the distance that you need to get from, you know, light to dark. Once you hit this point, you need to be able to just duplicate forever the black tile. So for example, like in Insignia, like I said, that's like 3 tiles. That's like 1, 2, 3. And then you can just repeat black forever. In other games, like here in Sonic the Hedgehog, it's probably 2 tiles, like 1, 2, and then you can repeat forever. In this tile set by Runa Heya, it's 1 tile, and then you can repeat forever. It just really is down to how you want to present the game world. Part of that comes down to, you know, aesthetically, like what are your needs for the world? Is it an overgrown world? Is it manicured? There's also a question of like, what does the repeating texture look like? Like in a lot of these games, full black is totally standard, and it's something that you can do. And even in Owlboy here, it's not black, but you know, this like darkest color, it's just completely empty. And you can see it here as well in like Castlevania Symphony of the Night. In a lot of examples, it's very common to go into like a full flat negative space color. But yeah, it's also common to have like a repeating texture as well, or like multiple repeating textures. And so it's really down to you in terms of how you want to present that depth. In a lot of these more modern, high-bit sort of like indie games that are side-scrollers, it's very common to present the geometry like that there is a face that the player is running on, and the collider is somewhere in the middle of that face. And then there is like an edge underneath that where we can see like the side of whatever structure we're looking at. And then it fades into some sort of repetition in black. That's very, very common. And so if we're going to use that as an example, like contrary to say this Castlevania example where the collider is literally on the very top edge and you don't really get a good transition, you can see between this grass and the dirt, it's sort of like really obvious that that's where the line is. In these examples, yeah, we have that sort of like front or top edge that we're seeing, and it kind of looks like it's almost slanted looking at us a little bit. So if we're going to do that, it's really important to make room for that and to think about how we're going to do it. While these might be the guides for colliders and the tiles that are dedicated to them, as far as the visual presentation, it might actually look something more like this. Okay, we might say, well, by this point here, that's where I want the absolute negative space to be. From this point here, thereabouts, we're going to keep it organic, so it doesn't need to be a straight line, but you know, for the sake of guides, maybe you might want to keep it a straight line. This point here, that's going to be our edge. That's going to be the transition point that's like between like the front and the top edge. And then above that, this here is going to be where the player is standing with the collider in this like orange line. So the orange line is the actual colliding point. So we get like half of like a little bit of background and a little bit of foreground, and the player stands right in the middle. That gives us a nice kind of example here of how you might mock this up, okay, from like a design standpoint. And you could go further in, as long as once we get to this point, these are fully repetitive, so we can't really do this, right? If we go inside of the line, now there's no block that repeats. There's no gray block that we can just duplicate over and over again. And if we want to create a gray block, we'd have to, you know, expand the base shape, and then now we're kind of like, you know, the requirements go up. So if we want to be able to just duplicate a shape that's essentially just one, and in fact, if we do that, we can probably just shrink this down, right, to something that's more like this, because then the repetitive shape is just this one, right, at that point. So we can drop down an entire requirement here if we do that. We could probably just get rid of that for now. So if we want to actually do it this way, we can do that, as long as by the time we get to this box here, that the green has stopped, right? We can't go any further. And that's totally like a valid way to do it. It's just that, you know, you have now like half a tile to make that transition. So if you are going to have like that kind of visual appearance where you want there to be stone with grass on top, that's totally fine. And that's probably enough. And then you would just have some sort of like shadow, maybe just like underneath this, and that's totally fine. But if you wanted something that's a little more rolling and a little more gradual, then you might dedicate another tile to that. And if you're going to do that, then you have to go back and you have to sort of like afford for a little bit of a larger size. But for the sake of the tutorial, I think it might be a good idea just to stick with this smaller size, because I'm not going to have that much time to flesh this out perfectly. So let's bring back the grid, and for the sake, I guess, of like forward thinking, let's just like expand this a little bit more to give us more space for that transition, and we can have that collider point, you know, hypothetically a little bit further out. But that's still totally fine. This is kind of like your guide. And I guess now that we know that we're only having exactly one tile for our entire like edge setup, now we can actually make a decision about how many tiles we need in total. So to make this match and to see how many tiles we need, what we're going to do is we're going to treat this as like solid, and this is like everything that goes around solid. And then we're going to take this and treat this as like a little bit different. Let me show you. So this is going to be empty, and this is going to be everything that goes around an empty shape. In this example, actually, what happens is this shape here goes there. This shape here goes there. This one here goes up here, and this one here goes there. And that means that we don't actually need these. Instead, what we need are the corners, okay? So for the sake of just making this look nice, we can go back to mode like 1, and we can then take this and then we can paint that in. And you can see that updates immediately. Now we know like, oh, okay, like this is that edge. And we can even do like a little internal red line just to say like where the visual edge was. So that's like maybe like 2 or 3 pixels down from there. Yeah. And now we just need to follow this for these. So we just need to go like back to mode 2 for a second and just do a bit of a scribble so we get 4 different tiles. We can go back to mode 1 and fill these in. So something like this, right? And we could probably just like copy, paste, and rotate. For the sake of like making this a tile atlas, like an actual tile set where there's no redundant tiles, you would then compress this down into something like this. And there you go. We have all of the like flat edges that face out to like thin air. Then you have outside corners, and now you have inside corners. And so from here, like, yeah, if you wanted to make it like really nice and like complete, again, it's like super simplistic. You would take like, say, this edge, paste it here. You would take like this edge, paste it like here, and then you would turn this into its own little rectangle. Okay, now that's not perfect, but you get the gist of what I'm doing here. Okay, so that's like on its own, just like a block that just like stands on its own. And there would be other examples too. You could do, like I've got here in these Apollo tile sets, you can have like tiles that are exactly 1 tile wide. So if you really wanted to have those, you can have like thin strips, and that's again just like taking this edge here, and you know, you would copy and paste it down, say a couple, and then erase like this line here, and similar sort of scenario. But I don't really want to talk about that today. It's not my goal to show you like every single possible thing you can do. I just want to show you like the baseline, which is like these here, and I want to show you the approach to building something out that feels naturalistic. Let's now basically just do the same thing here. So I'm just going to fill this in, and now we can do like a little bit of like pretend playtesting almost. You know, we can merge this, convert to a tile map, and we can sort of say like, oh, okay, we've got like one here, and we're going to go copy paste. We can stretch this out as far as we want. We can do some internal corners, so we can go like up. Okay, something like this. And if we're in mode 1, so we can actually just like update this to make it more appropriate to how we expect this to work. So like we can just like clean it up to make it nice and how we expect it to look. Okay, and you can see there it's already updated, so we can do that all the way around. So any errors that we make in terms of like filling out that template, we can fix them as we go. Now that we're here, it's pretty trivial to start drawing this, and I really want to emphasize, like, with this kind of pixel art, it really is an extension of like actual sort of like traditional art, right? In terms of the skills that you're picking up and how you're applying them. Like, yes, it's very minimal, but in terms of how we think about light and rendering an image, that all still applies. So what I want to do is teach you some techniques that are pixel art specific, as well as trying to justify them in like real art terms and psychology terms, so that you can understand kind of like what that approach looks like, and for your own tile sets that aren't necessarily just like grass, like how do you think about making a tile set in a way that serves your design goals as a designer. Now, I haven't yet like explained what those goals are, but we can cover them right now. So first and foremost, your tile set needs to be, if it's going to be naturalistic, it needs to feel like it's part of the environment. It needs to feel like it lives in the world that, you know, your character lives in. And when your character stands on it, it needs to feel like they're grounded in that space. That's the first thing. The colors, the lighting, they need to be reflective of what the rest of your scene looks like. You want to be able to think about what your background might look like as you're building your tile set. And this is where mock-ups are really important. Beyond that, it needs to not pull too much focus, okay? The main character is the main character. If you can't see your main character, or if your main character is obscured by the tile set, then it may be too loud. Okay, and by loud I mean pulling too much focus. And a lot of that has to do with contrast. So it's color choice, and it's the range of the brightest and the darkest colors in your tile set and how close they are. Okay, I talk about signal and noise quite a lot when I'm doing this kind of work, and this is where it's really, really critical. So just to be really clear for those of you who haven't seen any of my previous videos, what I mean by signal and noise is if we look at these shapes here, okay, obviously they're dark, and so because they live in a dark space, they don't really register as things that we need to look at. Our brain can just scan over them. Our eye just goes like, okay, yeah, whatever. But this point right here, it's actually very clear, right? It's not just brighter, but it's a point of brightness that's right next to darkness. It's a straight line amongst organic shapes. And so because it's different from what's around it, specifically, it registers to us as something that we should look at. And when we're looking at an entire screenshot, it's a hierarchy, right? These things compete with each other for our attention. And in the span of like an entire screenshot, definitely the character is almost always, unless your game is specifically trying to alter this and turn it on its head, your main character is kind of like what needs to be the most focal thing. And so the colors you use for your tile set, the amount of contrast, that's really important in determining how much space you give the player's eye to be resting on the main character. You know, you also need to consider things like UI, you know, how focal should that be? UI is really important, characters are really important. Ground terrain, where it is really important. Like knowing that this is like probably where the collider is important in platforming for sure. It's not unimportant. It's just a little bit less important than where the character is. So we're going to try to satisfy all of that while also making something that's aesthetically pleasant. As I'm working on this, what I'll do is I'll do what I always do, which is bring my character in, and I'm going to pop him on a new layer, and we're just going to assume that this is like what we want. We could actually, I would probably go for a smaller, like for the size of this tile set, it would make sense that the character is a smaller character. It's probably like half this size. Maybe we'll just like do a bit of a something here, maybe like keep the head size the same. Very hypothetical, it's all very theoretical and academic, of course. We could like shrink the character like down to this size and keep the head maybe like, well, no, that doesn't work, but, well, it kind of does work. We could just shrink it a little bit. Baby almond for your consideration. Okay, say our character's that small. I do not condone resizing sprites that way, by the way, but just for the sake of argument. If your character's this big. So we want to do a few things. We want to really establish where that collider is and where the character needs to be standing. So as far as contrast goes, this is a point where, yes, like overall, we should be able to look at this here and say, does this meet the criteria of what I expect to see in terms of like, yes, I should see like a line here, and this stuff should mostly be brighter than this stuff, and then this stuff should be brighter than this stuff, and this should all be totally like nothing here should stand out in the very middle. What I would say is I might probably go a little darker, like right at the edge here, just like try to soften this transition because it's not as important of an edge as this one. This is like way more important. So what that might mean is, well, maybe we actually drop this down a tone and we sharpen it all together. You can see now the edge is stronger and the transition between this color and this color is much weaker, which is good, right? That's giving us focus. And I like that, so that's not so bad. We might, I mean, I think it's probably not really suitable in this context, but what I have done in the past is like try to create a little bit of it like a depth here. So like you show, you know, maybe a little bit of like flat ground where the character's standing and then some grass behind. We're really running out of space here, so it's not really the most ideal place for it, but you know, we could probably try to get away with something here. Okay. And now I feel like we have quite a strong sense that there is a platform on top. There's like an edge on top. And there's like almost like a path, like a rail that the player is gonna like run along. And we have a couple of pixels to play with here for background as well. We could maybe just like drop into maybe this pixel too. And that's not so bad. What I'd like to do in that case is probably take this color and roll it down. So the grass is kind of like hanging over that edge. And I think that's a fine way to present this. I also think that, you know, I'd like to see maybe a little bit of a stronger line here for the actual edge. So like we're looking now at something that's a bit more like this. That's getting quite strong, maybe too bright, but it does let us bring this color back. How do I feel about that? I think that it's too bright now. And I think instead what that means is we make this very sparing. We use this brightest color. We use it, but we use it very, very sparingly. So where does that leave us? Let's just back away from the grid for a bit so we can let the piece breathe. What do we have here? I think overall, well, I want to soften this. I think this is like too strong now. And I want to show this grass progressing down into whatever the stone is. And we can take this stone and we can give it like very simple, kind of like a shadow. As long as we don't, like once we go down too far, it'll repeat internally and we don't want that. Or at least we can worry about that a bit later, but as long as we can have just like a little bit of space here, I think that's nice and clear. And then we can do like some internal, you know, repeating shapes like this, something like that if we really want to. And we can worry about like how we're going to flesh those out later. I would go for super low contrast in this space. If we're going to do that, I would go for like two colors that were so close together you almost couldn't tell that they were separate colors. Let's just say that we're reasonably happy with this and we want to keep going. You can play little tricks like skipping pixels here to make it feel a little more faded, which kind of like, it's almost like you've used a color that's closer together without actually having to do that. And yeah, like from here down, I want to show you like this grass. I also don't think that it's a bad idea to have some of this grass color make its way down into this space. We're going for an effect of something that's in nature, and in nature we don't have these like necessarily hard transitions between like, you know, grass and dirt. I mean, of course you would if you had like a clean cross section of the ground, but then you've still got things like roots and bits and pieces. Like we can give the eye some nice, you know, gentle transitions without having to resort to these like really obvious flat lines. And I think having these less eye-catching, less jarring straight lines here, more undulating, softer, noisier spaces, really does let the main character pop a lot more. So what I want to do now is establish a shape. Okay, this shape is going to be the kind of like Plato's essence, for those of you who know philosophy, of like what a blade of grass needs to look like, right? It's something that we're going to repeat over and over again in this tile set. We'll see it in the background, we might see it in the foreground. Essentially, it's going to be what grass looks like in your world. And if you can find that shape and then modulate it and tweak it, I think what that does is pull everything together a lot better. So again, as I was saying, like in Chasm here, it's this shape, right? It's this like this shape here, kind of like a Windows mouse pointer, but upside down. That shape being everywhere really, really helps tie it all together. Same thing here with this tile set. You can see these kind of like V shapes, these overlapping V shapes. That being like all the way throughout really, really helps. Now, the size of your grass is something that is worth considering. It's not something that I would necessarily just do arbitrarily. I think it's something that you should think about in terms of like the scale of your character in the world. If you're making a retro game, you're kind of going for something that's a bit more pixel art, nostalgia. A lot of these games are marketed towards a younger audience at the time, and so usually it's a good idea to caricature things a little bit. We're in that like cartoon space just slightly. So grass that's like quite large in this space, given that we've got like chibi sized characters almost, you know, they're like 3 heads tall, like it's not a bad idea to sort of oversize the grass. And that also gives you more room to detail the grass. Because I'll tell you what, trying to detail grass that's literally this big, there's not a lot of room here to play with, right? You can't really do that much with the grass. If you could do this, you could do this, right? You could do that, you could do that. You're kind of running out of options pretty quickly. And so what you end up with is more of the difference between a texture and like an object. So we're either drawing blades of grass at like larger scales, and then we're smoothing the transition between those blades of grass, or we are creating, you know, a tile that has a grassy texture to it. It's kind of a little bit of both at its best, but I think you really want to be able to see those shapes, in my opinion. The question is, what does a blade of grass look like? Well, maybe in this world, I mean, the way that I tend to like to do it is, I like to have shapes that are, I want to see like overhanging of this blade of grass, and I want to see kind of like its depth. You know, something like this is quite nice. You can mix it up. You can have the blade of grass standing up like this. You can do like split, sort of like 2 blades that are like right next to each other. Maybe one that's smaller, one that's larger. It's a little bit of variety here. So this is kind of like my preferred scale. You could probably scale that down to maybe like this height, but I wouldn't go much smaller than that. So this could be like a pretty good reference for us. And oh gosh, if we can actually cram that into this, I think we'll be, you know, really doing a good job here. So let's see if we can start creating some of those shapes. You can see it here, right? This kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those pixels create the shape of the grass. And this is where the interplay between texture and object is very, very important, because you don't want to draw this shape over and over and over again inside of this space until it's full. That's not really your goal. Your goal is to take what we've got, which is something that again is low signal, and keep it that way, keep it in the background, but suggest those details, okay? What that means, generally speaking, is that at the edges of things, because you want the edges to be clear anyway, at the edges is where you make more of an effort to draw the shapes. And I'll give you a really good example here, like in Runa's tileset here. You can see that the most contrast is right around here. This is where we're seeing these shapes really clearly because they're against like a shaded area. And so that's all nice and clear. But then this area up the top is kind of like lower contrast, right? It's a bit more noisy and it's harder to see the blades of grass. If we had tried to draw very clear, V shapes in this space, I think it would be to the detriment of the tile set. I think it's better that we have more, like look at this space. Look at how much of this is all that one light green, okay? This is called like an open shape and it's negative space, okay? And in the context of what we were just doing, like leaving this as it is what we're talking about. So leaving negative space is a good thing. Having examples of detail is great, but knowing like when to stop, that's probably what you're here for. I'm not unaware of that. So how do we do it? Well, we have 3 different colors here, 1, 2, 3, and we can start layering those shapes inside of these color spaces. You have like one of these that comes right down, like a larger shape, and maybe one that's just like a little bit like that. And we're starting to see like we've got this variety, like all in the same space. The edge is starting to lose a little bit of its contrast. Like we don't have this very obvious line that goes all the way across, but that's okay because this is grass. And we just want to like feather it out a little bit. And already like you're starting to get the impression that, oh yeah, there's like grass all along here. And it doesn't take a lot. It really doesn't take a lot to extend that into the top sort of face here. We've got some perspective going on, so it doesn't take much for you to then kind of like project in your mind that this is happening all along here. I might just make this all solid black just so that we can get a better idea of what's happening in the background. And I want to see if we can create some more distinction here, maybe like right at the top. Don't want to go crazy with it, keep it like really nice and loose, but just see if we can create like a bit of variety in the shapes. Something like this is pretty good. Maybe like even something that's like an area where it's just the flat color. Just some diversity. I don't want it to feel outlined. That's not really what I'm going for. Like I said, we didn't have that many pixels to play with to begin with. So it's more just about like, how can I create some sense of variety? And I think that's looking pretty good. Pretty good. What I may do is reintroduce this lightest color right along where I think the sunlight would be hitting the corner. We call this like specular light, when like the corner of like, you can see it like right here. It's like the brightest point on this on like the top edge of this pen, like right here. It's like catching the room's light better than everything else, like right there, because we have like the surface of the pen rolling, and so there's like every possible angle is being represented. So whatever angle the light like bounces perfectly back at the camera from the from the window back into the pen back at the camera, that's being represented right on that edge, and we call that specular lighting. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. It makes the grass look a little bit shinier. And we could go like maybe 1 pixel brighter if we really wanted to max that out, but be sparing with it. My general rule is for every shade brighter that you go, you want to use that exponentially less. Okay, so like if like this is your graph of like colors, right? You might want to use this color, this like mid color, like a lot of the time, and then like the brighter color, like less than half of that time. And then, like this really bright color, even less. And then the lightest color, like it's like barely anything. It's like no pixels dedicated to that. And that, I don't know, like physically in life, if that's the case. But I think having some kind of, it's almost like a bell curve. It's almost like a normal distribution or like a quadratic curve. Light tends to play by naturalistic rules. So having that kind of fall off, I think, makes it feel more natural. It also just helps keep things focused, of course. So with this, like the goal here is to not have too much repetition that's obvious. So here, like I don't really like this sawtooth creation that I've just got going on here. So it's like we've seen like 1, 2, 3, and then like a jump up, and then 1, 2, jump up, 1, 2, 3, jump up, 1, 2, 3, 4, jump up. It's too similar. So I can knock that down to something that's a little more like this, maybe like flatten this out a little more. We have like one example of like one that's larger. And now it's like way less obvious where that repeats. Now I might, you know, like part of me thinks it's maybe a little much. What I would say is we've probably got too many different colors in the same space. And so I think this may be stronger if we shrink some of this down and let this negative space breathe a little bit more. We can solve this problem a number of different ways. It's not like, it doesn't have to be one way or another, but I think starting to close these shapes down helps fade into this space a lot better. And we could even maybe like start doing that here as well. You know, maybe we could even reintroduce some of this color and like the shapes of the grass into the repeating space. And maybe we could knock some of this shadow back down. I just want it to take up less of a focus. And I think that would be better. This is starting to feel a lot more naturalistic to me. Once we've got this template, we can start obviously applying this everywhere. Like, of course, it's not something where we would just do it along the top. But my recommendation to you is try to like think about like from back here, like what is it that you see with this, and how would you replicate that without spending the painstaking amount of time it would take to replicate this exact kind of texture along. I mean, you could do some copying and pasting, and that's fine. But if you just want to like rough this up a little and just see like, okay, like what would this look like if I happened to go all the way along? Then by all means do that. Because you'll get a better sense of like what you like, and if you like it, doing it this way. I think it would be better if the grass didn't go all the way around. Personally, I kind of like the idea of there being something else under here. Maybe we take this rock texture and we apply it underneath. So I'm going to do that now. And maybe we just like introduce this like lighter rock texture. And maybe like we would sort of like bite into this side here a little more with this. Maybe it's kind of like it's got a little bit of rock and a little bit of grass, because you know, grass maybe has a harder time growing on that exact side like that. And we want to think about things in this way. Like, I think, you know, you have such an opportunity with your game to tell a story with your tile sets. And, you know, what better way than to, you know, make decisions about the world and to actually like do some world building, even at this level. I don't have anything against, like, I'm now just talking to you as Adam and just as like a gamer as well as a designer. You know, I don't hate this. Like, there's totally an opportunity for you to make a game, especially like, you know, in the case of Super Mario Bros. 2 and Super Mario Bros. 3, those are both games that take place inside of an aesthetic that is not necessarily real life. Like in Super Mario Bros. 2, you're in a dream world. And so having things like these, you know, kind of geometric patterns, this idea of the stage comes up a lot in those two games. In Mario Bros. 3, when you exit a level, you exit the stage, you know, stage right, and you go into like, you go off stage into this like black area, and then you sort of like finish the level and move on. Having the notion of artifice, like artificial elements in the world, this is a design choice in the case of these games. And I think that's the kind of care that you should also be putting into your own games. So think about like, what is the context of my game? What is the story that I'm telling? In the case of Sonic the Hedgehog, you know, there's a lot of these like robotic elements, right? Things that feel like they are made of metal or mechanical like features. And, you know, the villain is Dr. Robotnik. Maybe, you know, these are part of his creations. I'm not really sure. Personally, I don't think that in the case of Sonic the Hedgehog, there is that much of a world building element to why these trees look like that. I think they look cool. But I think, yeah, paying your game that much respect and that much attention, if you're spending the amount of time that it takes to making a game, you know, you might as well. I think it's worth it, is what I'm saying. Because what's the alternative? You just kind of like throw some grass that looks like you downloaded it from wherever, into the game, and you just, you know, at that point you may as well just have done that. You may as well have just gone to itch and downloaded your own set. You wouldn't be following this tutorial if you didn't plan on integrating, you know, your own design sensibilities into what you're making. And, you know, in this exercise, like, try to give yourself the opportunity to experiment a little bit. I know it's hard to, especially when you're starting out. Once you've committed yourself to an idea, like for example, the shape of my grass here, if I was to decide like, oh, what if we just tried this like totally differently? What if we just did something completely different? And then find out that we like it, it might feel a little bit like we're wasting our effort. Like, oh, we put all that time into the previous grass. Like, now we have to throw work away if we want to proceed with a design that we like more. I think that's like, as an attitude, it's natural, but it's also harmful to the end result of your game. So your goal should be to like prototype the most amount of ideas in the least amount of time. That's efficiency, right? That's design efficiency. So I quite like the distribution here of like textures that we're seeing, of like the light and, you know, how that's all coming together. What I'd like to see now is like the grass shapes appear back in this space. So the distribution of the colors is right, but now the detail's wrong. So let's bring that back. Maybe some of this grass is actually pointing up, not quite down. So we can start thinking about like bringing these more higher contrast shapes back in, and more obvious sort of eye-catching, not totally eye-catching, but, you know, just something to give us the impression of what we're looking at. And maybe we'll bring the grid back just for a sec. Okay, we've got some space to play with. I think this will help a lot. I think it did help a lot. Okay, and I'm just like adding some of those highlights back in, just creating that suggestion of where the collider is. You know, of course there's going to be one, so we want to see it. You know, since you've got only so many tiles to work with here, like, you don't really have to go into this headspace of trying to make everything symmetrical. Like, some of the asymmetry, again, because it's naturalistic, is good, you know. And you can, you know, try to mix these shapes up a little, or return back to your original shape and just try to like make sure that it's nice here. Because it's the same content, you're not actually losing anything. But do make sure that you use all of the variations eventually. You know, it's kind of like, you know, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. Right now we're not using all of the alphabet here, so it might be a good idea to just bring a shape forward that actually uses them all. So now we can then come back here and keep going. Hopefully you can see where I'm going with this, and I think from here, like, the process kind of, you know, it explains itself a little bit. If you don't have a tool like this where you can, you know, very easily see these changes happening in real time, I would say, you know, work as long as you can in this space while still being able to, you know, comfortably make adjustments and be confident that what you're doing looks good. But then once you're at that point where you want to start previewing this, take it into your game engine and prototype it there. And preferably try to save your art assets out in such a way that you can very quickly export them and then view them in real time in your engine. I show you how to do that in my original tileset video in Unity. It just so happens that because Aseprite has this feature now, I don't really need to do that anymore, and I recommend, if you have access to Aseprite, to use it for this reason. Because I think like this process, it pretty much leaves like nothing to chance, nothing to doubt. You can see exactly how this is going to look under a number of different situations, and I think that's really helpful. If I happen to take some time to put some more time into this, I might throw this one up on itch, and you can download it if you are you know, interested in looking a little closer at it or using it in your own games. I will give you license to do that. I know many of you are, you know, keen to support the stream and support the YouTube channel, and so, you know, giving you ways to do that I think is also really cool. So I think I'm like really happy with this. You know, there's definitely work that we would do to tidy this up. You know, it's definitely not finished, but I'm really liking the direction, and I'm happy with where it's going. So from here, what I would really advise you to do, once you're pretty happy, like at this point, like maybe 70% happy with where the tile looks, start putting it into your game and thinking about the geometry of the levels, especially if there's any kind of like cutscenes or story significance to certain areas in the game. This is where you're gonna want to start thinking about the background and foreground elements of your scene and how they mesh with your tile set. So in this case, like, you know, maybe you would have, you know, elements in the foreground which kind of take similar colors, maybe brighter colors or darker colors or more dramatic, whatever you want to do, and allow you to accentuate these shapes, right? To flesh out, like, what does grass look like in the foreground? Maybe a slightly larger because it's closer, and you could place these elements like in the corners of a scene, or, you know, wherever you want. And you would follow the same ideas, right? You would maybe try to keep these same cracks in there, or whatever it is that you've decided on doing as like your visual motifs. Try to replicate the same kinds of ideas, right? And that goes from, depending on how dramatic this is, like if this is like way in the foreground, you can be a little more creative with the shapes. But, you know, if we're working with something that's kind of mid-ground, then you just want to create, the same ideas. Now, what I do with these sketches is I place them on a new layer, like I've got right now. And eventually what I do is I migrate them. I migrate them to its own file, or I give it like a special space in the tileset. So like once we're done with this experiment, we would like, you know, just kind of go over here and we would take all of this away. So we've just got our tileset, and I would take these and place them in just like spaces that are nice and packed. And I call them one-offs, and they're just things that you can place in the scene. Again, like either in the negative space, so like in the level, you would replace some of these empty tiles with these foreground tiles, or you can do it on another like layer if your engine allows you to do that. And then of course you could think about the background. So, you know, what does the back of this scene look like? Maybe we've got like more grass coming up the back. Maybe we've got these like vines. Maybe there's like a field, right, that we're in, and we want to be able to see some of this grass like crossing the field, right? And then like maybe it's going up over a hill or something like that. And so you can then think about how you could like extend the grass out that way. That pretty much covers what I wanted to share with you today. I hope you found this video useful. I certainly feel like I've packed in just about everything that I wanted to say in terms of the fundamentals of this approach, and specifically the ways that I think about building this set out, and how I've, especially more recently, come to appreciate the way that you can actually guide the eye around a tile set and actually like create that sense of structure, right? Have certain elements be more focal than others, and how you can soften areas visually without sacrificing detail. So, thank you so much for watching. If you have any other questions, I would love to make more videos about this kind of topic, so we could do a part 2, or we could do questions and answers, or whatever you like. And we will be doing that in another video. Leave your questions in the comments below. Until next time. Hey pal, thanks for watching, and thanks most especially to the patrons and Twitch subs who support this channel and my game dev project Insignia. To find out more, click the links in the description below. And if you like this video, tell YouTube by clicking the like button, and then YouTube will tell me, and then I'll make more videos. That's nice. Thanks again, and until next time,